Let us welcome to the stage SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce. She will be joined on stage by Ron Hammond, Director of Government Relations, Blockchain Association.
It's good to get back to my roots here. And I know we're talking about the Wild West here. You're talking about Ohio. We have Wyoming with Senator Lummis, and we also have Congressman Davidson actually from Ohio as well, and then Senators Cruz and Cornyn. So we got the whole Wild West.
The Western contingent.
Exactly. There's a lot going on, and actually I think you were the first sheriff almost in town when it came to the Wild West. Before anyone, quite frankly, on the regulatory side, you were there out in front. So how does it feel actually with so much attention in DC now focused on crypto? Whereas you were the first person, quite frankly, at the SEC to really be talking about these issues dating back almost 4 years ago. How does it feel now?
I mean, I guess on the one hand, I'm happy that people are talking about it. On the other hand, I can't believe that it's been this long and that we've really not made a lot of regulatory progress.
We have some really good updates that were today. I mean, we saw a lot of focus on a letter from Senator Toomey on stablecoins and the presidential working group about some concerns in that process. We did see some rumors circulating about an executive order in this space, more in regards to studies, but definitely at least there's some action or some hopeful action from the administration. But at least for your realm here, one more focus on stablecoins in your speech here. We've heard the whole gamut apply to stablecoins, ranging from poker chips at a casino to money market funds to actual security. So what's your thoughts, at least currently, on the stablecoin front of what's happening, your conversations with the presidential working group, as well as the need for either legislation in this space or more regulatory clarity from the regulators themselves?
I think stablecoins are, they're different. As I said in my remarks, you can't paint them all with the same brush, and I think people who are issuing stablecoins need to think about where they might fit within the legal framework. Given the growth, I think there's going to be real interest in putting them into some regulatory framework, but my concern is stablecoins are a pretty fundamental piece of this cryptoverse, and so doing something that would make it hard or impossible for people to use them would have real consequences. So that's one worry that I have, that it's going to be viewed as a way to choke off growth in the space. But I think a more likely thing is that it gets stuffed into a regulatory regime that just doesn't quite work right, and we'll lose sight of the fact that we really need to focus on what it is people are using these for, and then look at the risks that we see associated with them, try to come up with some rules that address the risks, but also allow people to do with them what they want to do.
I mean, we see a lot of folks, especially in the media, paint a pretty scary picture of stablecoins. We're hearing back to the Wildcat banking era, some folks have regarded it. We see some folks say that these things are going to bring down the financial system as we know it. And especially the market cap being so small now, mind you, it's grown a lot. But what are your thoughts on the narratives painting them in a really bad picture, or quite frankly scary, that's been pretty new recently in terms of just talking about stablecoins recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think the growth has people looking at it, and regulators are supposed to worry about, what happens when it gets bigger and what happens when there's a problem, if there's a run. So those are fair questions to ask. But I do find some of the analogies that people are using a little off base. So people like to point to I'm not a banking lawyer, I'm not a banking historian, but I know enough that when people point back to that era of private currency, they're conflating a lot of things. And one of the reasons that many banks in that era had problems was because they were operating under government regulations that forced them to be unit banks, which meant there could only be one. They had to be confined to a locality, so if there was a problem in that locality, it would take down the bank. So diversification is valuable, or they were being required to hold notes that weren't good notes, they were government notes. I'm not the expert. I commend people to take a look at George Selgin and Larry White's work on this topic. But again, free banking, when it's truly free, had a very good period in history. So I guess if people want to point to that as a stablecoin precedent, then that could work out well. But again, it makes sense for all of us to sit down together, think about the issues around transparency, around stability, and come up with something sensible.
Yeah. Well, actually, to build on that, coming together, when I was with Congressman Davidson, we met a couple times actually with you and your staff, and a lot of focus was on the Safe Harbor proposal. And I know that's evolved over the years, but what's your thoughts now on the Safe Harbor proposal and the market you put out there a couple years ago as to all the things that have happened in both the DeFi space and the stablecoin space, and quite frankly, all the enforcement actions that have happened? What are your thoughts on how the Safe Harbor now works, given all that's happened in the past couple of years in the crypto space, which is quite a lot?
It is a lot. I think it would have been more useful had it been able to go into place earlier, but I think it still could play a useful role in addressing that initial uncertainty about whether something is securities offering or not, and then providing some of the information, making sure that people are getting some of the information that they would want to get. But I think it's only really the starting point to try to define when the securities laws apply to an offering. Then you've got to go downstream and ask, okay, so then what? If this was sold in a securities offering, is it always a security? How do you then transact in that token later? And then how do entities, can they list these tokens alongside things that aren't securities? There are a lot of really difficult questions, and we are definitely not investigating what the answers to those questions are. So even when we start really putting clear lines around what a security is, we have a ton of work to do at the SEC.
Gotcha. Well, the role of Congress actually is a huge factor in this as well. And I know Congress has been pretty slow to act, and especially in this space. That's why the regulators are taking the lead in this realm. But as we saw on Tuesday, Gary Gensler testified from the House Financial Services Committee, and I would say almost half the questions that came up in that hearing were crypto-focused. Whereas beforehand, when I was working with Congressman Davidson, we might have gotten one question to the SEC chair, probably would come from Congressman Davidson. But now it has grown up, and it's both sides of the aisle are asking questions that they're curious. Some have more hard views. But we are seeing a lot more of a bipartisan concern currently of the SEC approach to crypto. Are you seeing that at the SEC as well? Are you seeing your colleagues on the other side of the aisle also expressing these concerns? And do you think that this is an issue that can remain bipartisan, or we're having a situation where we could turn into a little split on the party line?
I think there's real interest in crypto across the commission. One thing people need to remember is the SEC and other Washington regulators have a ton of things on their agenda, and crypto is a small part of it. It's getting a lot of attention because of the fact that it's growing fast. And so, people are paying attention and are interested in learning more about it. But there's also, I think, just the reality that there's a lot of other stuff on the agenda. So I think this is the start, is to get people interested in at least paying a little bit of attention, asking questions, trying to dispel some of the myths around, that are really persistent around crypto, and then trying to get, again, to the hard work of, okay, so we're going to build a regulatory framework. Is it going to be Hester's regulatory framework, which is premised on the idea that people should be able to do what they want? Generally, if two people want to enter into a transaction, they should be able to do that as long as there aren't external consequences. Well, probably it's not going to be on that side. It might be more, where we have to build a more intense regulatory framework around it. But at least we need to build something so people know what they can and can't do.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I want to get to one of your points. You're talking about communication with the SEC, especially as a company or folks trying to educate the regulators. Congressman Gonzalez actually mentioned this in his remarks to Chairman Gensler on Tuesday, and he's hearing that there's we're experiencing this too at the Blockchain Association for a lot of our companies, that there's a fear to talk to the SEC because it could be an enforcement action down the road potentially, or it could expose what the company is. And so there's a lot of folks who are more hesitant, even though they're good actors, to approach the SEC and to educate them, especially in the DeFi space, because they're afraid of a potential enforcement action. What's your message to those companies who have that hesitancy to educate the regulators, especially in this new stuff?
This is a really difficult area for me, because on the one hand, I think it is very important for people to come in and talk to the regulators. Tell us what you're building. Tell us what you're excited about. I want to hear about it. You can bounce your ideas off us, get some ideas about what things you might want to be thinking about. But I mean, I've been very critical of my agency for taking an enforcement first approach, and I think that that approach has been continuing. And so, you know, I wish I had a better answer for you. I still recommend, we've got great people on the staff, people who know a lot more about this industry, about this technology than I do. So I still urge you to talk to them, but the SEC it shouldn't be the regulator dictating downwards. It should be the SEC is a regulator for the people, and so the people should sort of be telling us how they want us to do our job. You know, how strict a regulatory framework do you want us to build? How do you want us to do this? So that's kind of what I'm hoping that we'll get to, but maybe I'm still too much of an idealist.
Well, you know, we can all be idealists, right? One last question for you. You know, talking more about the role of Congress here. You know, what's your message to the folks on Senate Banking and House Financial Services who are now starting to take a look at it? You know, we've seen Chairwoman Waters made a digital asset working group within her delegation to focus solely on these issues. So as Congress is looking at these issues right now, looking at regulatory framework, whether you know safe harbor, more of a bright line test, you know, what's your message to Congress as they're looking more into this space?
Well, I think it's great that they're looking into it. So I think that's step one, is just to say it's wonderful you're doing it. Two, make sure you talk to the people who are in this space using the technology so that you understand what's at stake here. Because too often Congress is just hearing the bad side of things and not the good side of things. So make sure that you're getting the holistic picture of what this is all about before you conclude that you want to squash it or that you want to regulate it out of existence.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Commissioner. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.